Hello and welcome to Blades of Thunder. Welcome to part one of the Red Lodge Westland Whirlwind build update. We're about halfway through, and in this episode we're going to talk about the mechanics and the test flight after we'd fitted it in. Okay, so if you can remember back from the build video, we had a T-Rex 550E and we've had to modify it quite a bit to make it fit inside this beautiful fuselage. So what have we done to make this set of mechanics fit? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is get rid of the fuselage. Okay, so here in front of me is the mechanics that we're using for our Whirlwind. Now, what have we done to make this set of mechanics fit? So as you can see, we've got a long tail boom. It's a lot longer than average for a T-Rex 550 or 600 for that matter. It's probably closer to a 700 size tail boom on this, and it is a Roban extended tail boom for one of their 700 size models. Can't remember which one it was, but it's a Roban one. Okay, and then we've got a Roban 45-degree gearbox here that fits the tail with the extension that comes with it and a standard Align tail rotor gearbox. Okay, now we're not using push rods and bell cranks down here like some of the other models. What we've got is a tube with inside has another plastic tube and a bit of piano wire that goes up and down. Now I find that's the best way to make the tail control go round corners nice and easily with minimal resistance, so you can use nice fast servos to control the tail. Okay, the other problem that we hit with the mechanics was the main shaft was too short, and try as we might, and we spent a lot of time looking, we could not find a long enough off-the-shelf main shaft, so we had to make a new main shaft for this. And we've also changed the direction of the main rotor head, which is quite a simple matter, and we'll explain that shortly. Okay, so let's start with what we've actually done to the mechanics to make it fit inside our fuselage. Okay, and we'll start at the front end. Okay, so what we've done is we've taken off the standard plastic battery tray in and just put another brace across here. We've taken the skids off, and the screws on the skids normally go up from underneath, but we've had to change that because we're using captive nuts in the fuselage to hold this down. So what we've done is we've had to modify the fuselage, and we've opened up some spaces here and here on both sides. We've opened up the metal holes so that the M3 bolts can just slide up and down, and then they will go through razor box inside the fuselage to sit on the mechanics tray, and it sits quite nicely. We spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time jigging, even made to get the main rotor head central in the hole that comes out the top of the fuselage. We made a jig, and it all fits nicely. Okay, so obviously the standard 120-degree swash plate setup, and we move forward to the main shaft. Now, we could not buy an off-the-shelf main shaft to make this mechanics fit in the fuselage. How did we make the main shaft? Well, we purchased some silver steel rod from eBay, and it was precision silver steel, so it's guaranteed to be straight. Had to take 1 mil off the bottom, because if you look at a standard main shaft, it's slightly narrower at the bottom so that it fits into the auto rotation gear. Okay, now once we had the shaft made so it fits properly, the next thing is to cut it down to length. Now I cut it down to length on my lathe, so it's a very accurate way of doing it. You could use a saw or a Dremel cutting disc or whatever and file it flat, but please do make sure that you file it smooth on the top. I use the lathe, but you can use a saw. Okay, and then the next task is to drill the 2 holes, top and bottom, for the Jesus bolts. Okay, now I used a milling machine to cut that because they're very accurate. You can use a pillar drill to drill the holes. However, I would not recommend you try to do this with an electric handheld drill or a Dremel or even a windy drill. Okay, now you're cutting through steel. Okay, so it needs to be done slowly and accurately. So you're going to need to center punch it. You're going to need a cutting fluid to help the drill go through, and you need to keep adding to that cutting fluid as you drill the holes. Also, very importantly, is you do not try to drill the hole all in one. You need to do it in stages. Okay, this helps keep the material cool. Okay, and it also helps the drill to cut. It's much easier to do it this way. So what I did was I drilled a pilot hole first, a 2 mil pilot hole, and I used a center drill. Okay, and now a center drill is a very fat, stubby drill, so it won't, as it touches the piece, it won't deflect like that. Okay, it will go straight down and drill the hole, and it makes a start. It won't go all the way through a 10 mil piece of steel like that. So what you have to do is you drill it down as far as it will go. It will also cut a nice countersink, but you don't want to go too deep with a countersink. It's just enough to take the swarf off and take the burrs off. Okay, next you go through with a 2mm drill, followed by a 2.5mm drill, then a 3mm drill, because it's 3mm bolts that hold this in place. So 3mm drill, and then you check it, make sure the bolt goes through, and it goes through nice and easily. So you may need to go through with if it's tight, go through with a 3.1. Okay, do not go any bigger than 3.1 because you don't want it wobbling. Okay, so once we've done that, we needed to fit it into the mechanics. Now, while we had the gearing all out, it was a good opportunity to change the direction, because a standard T-Rex 550 has a clockwise rotation, and wanted this to have a scale anti-clockwise rotation or counterclockwise. Okay, now it's a simple matter to do that with an Align helicopter. You take the one-way bearing out. I mark it so I know which is the top, and then using a brass drift, just gently hammered it out. Now, please be gentle, all right, because it drops out, so that it might roll around on the floor, and then you won't know which way up it is, which is why I marked it. Then you turn it around, and I used the vise with lots of tape and rubber jaws on it to push the one-way bearing back in the right way, and then that allows it to have a counterclockwise rotation. Now, the advantage to having the counterclockwise rotation is the tail rotor now being on this side of the helicopter and not the standard side allows the tail rotor now to turn up into the main rotor disc, which is another scale detail. Right, so now we've got the longer shaft, the controls are all too short. So we needed to make new control rods. Okay, and making control rods is a relatively simple process. These are M2.5 rods. These are control rods. They came from Vario, but then only because I had them. You can use any steel 2.5 rod to make these, and we've changed the ball link heads to Vario as well, purely and simply because it's what we had in stock and they fit very nicely. Okay, so we made 3 new rods for that join the servos to the swash plate, so it's roughly about midway now. Okay, and then the next thing we needed to do was to lengthen the control rods from this 3-blade Roban head, okay, which is basically a plug and play head, so you don't need to do any phasing with this. Okay, but because we've increased the length of these, it is no longer a DFC head. Okay, this is very, very important. We have fitted a swash follower on the main rotor shaft. Okay, now this will take out all those twisting forces that could affect the controls. Now if the swash plate is twisting while you're flying, you could find that the phasing is put out slightly. So this bit is very, very important. It keeps these nice and straight and in the right position, and it becomes plug and play. And with the Roban swash plate that came with the main rotor head, all we had to do was to fit an extra ball in between 2 of the heads, because the Roban swash plates that they supply are drilled and threaded to take up to a 5-blade head. Okay, so you've got plenty of scope to muck around with them. Okay, also an important feature is on the top we've put 2 nuts, okay, which are locking nuts, and it stiffens the whole thing up, so it eliminated any lateral movement. Okay, and it works very, very well. Now the other major modification we've had to make to the standard mechanics is to lengthen the tail, put a 45-degree angle in, and shorten the tail tube that came with the 45-degree things to the right size. Okay, so we've also had to make a new drive shaft. Okay, for some reason the one that came with this was too short, so I've made a new one. And how did I make that? Well, basically I took the ends off the one that was supplied, so the cruciform ends that were on came supplied with it. I took them off and I glued them with very strong epoxy into a carbon fibre tube. And once that epoxy had cured, I drilled a hole through and then pinned it with some aluminium bar so that it can't unscrew. Okay, now that has the added bonus of meaning I don't have to worry about which way round I put the shaft in. Okay, because it will not come undone. The other, if you look at a standard torque tube that comes with in these kits, the cruciform end is threaded in, and you must put them in the right way round, because if you don't, they can unscrew. I wouldn't want to put it to the test, but I always check them and pin them. Okay, it's just for safety's sake. You know, you're building an expensive model, you don't want something like a drive shaft to fail on you. Okay, so once we'd made the new drive shaft, helps. We've made them out of carbon fibre, not aluminium or steel tubing, because it's a lot lighter, and as you can see, it's quite a long length, and having a carbon fibre tube just reduces the weight down a little bit. That way we won't have to add so much weight to the front of the model, and it just helps to reduce things down for when we set the centre of balance up and the centre of gravity on the helicopter. Okay, now this is a standard Roban 45-degree tail rotor gearbox or intermediate gearbox, and that has the same size tube as this, and it goes up into the tail rotor gearbox. Now the one that is supplied with the 45-degree gearbox was far too long. It would have come up about here, so we've had to shorten it down so that it fits in the fuselage nicely, and the tail rotor drive shaft comes out in the correct place. Okay, and that again was a simple matter of measuring the difference between where we wanted the tail rotor drive shaft and where the tail rotor drive shaft was, and shortening this tube and the drive shaft by the same amount. Okay, and to shorten it, to cut the tube, used a pipe cutter, and then again made a carbon fibre drive shaft to fit in that, using the cruciform ends from the original drive shaft, and it works very well. Okay, the next task is to make the control run. Now Vario sell an aluminium, plastic and rod control run. It's about 1 metre long. It's really good. I love it. So what you do is you need to buy some of these clamps. Okay, and there's one at either end, one on the servo, one on the bell crank here. Okay, and it goes, you lay it on, okay, you fit it on and you lay it up, and then using a spring bender, gently put the bend in. Now you must do this, you must work it out so that the bend is as gentle as possible. Okay, if you put too much of a bend in, it will bind and be too tight. So we've got a nice gentle bend. It starts about here and finishes here. Okay, and it's nice and smooth. We get no binding whatsoever. And then the piano wire that's inside is clamped down using either the grub screws supplied, or what I've done here is I've replaced the grub screw with an M3 bolt, and it's got a hex head on it, which makes it easier to adjust inside the model. So I can use a spanner from down here to adjust that so that we can get the pitch on the tail in exactly the right place, okay, without having to take the whole thing out of the fuselage again. Right, and I also mark on the top there where the neutral point is for the model. So once we got the mechanics all assembled, we needed to fit them inside the fuselage and onto the mechanics tray, and then that was the point at which everything's gone. So to get the mechanics into the fuselage, you need to take the tail off, leave the piano wire control run in, and the front section drops in through the top, the tail goes in through the back, you meet it up inside the helicopter, and then using Allen keys you can tighten up the bolts, and don't forget the safety bolt there, don't forget to do that, and fit it in, and then you can tighten up, you can get the tail rotor in the right place and tighten that up as well. And once you've got the tail boom fitted securely, you can then fit bolt the mechanics to the fuselage, because it is easier while you can still move this around inside the fuselage. You can get your arm in through the big hole at the top and tighten things up, and if you need to, you can look in through the side windows and see stuff. A good strong light is required for that, but it does go in quite nicely and quite easily. Okay, so to fit this in the right place in the mechanics, we put it all in dry, okay, and set it up. Put my red jig on the top, got the mast in the right position, and then using a pencil marked to the correct place for where the razors go. Now you don't want to glue the razors in, you need to have them separate, okay, so that it makes it a lot easier to get the mechanics in and out if they're separate. But you can either glue them together or do what I've done, is tape them together. Now I've taped them together because I can adjust them if I need to. Okay, and then once you've got your positions marked on the mechanics base, you can take that out, take the mechanics out. On the bench, you can pop it on, you can mark up the correct positions, then you can drill the holes, and we've glued in an extra piece of wood underneath just to make it a little bit thicker so that the captive nut that we're using isn't poking through the top. Okay, because they are a little longer than the plywood that's supplied. So using a scrap bit of ply, we've just made it a bit thicker, drilled the holes, glued everything in position. And now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the glue that we used. Okay, now to fix the mechanics bed to the fuselage and the frames, I used a epoxy and microfiber mix. Now I use microfibers purely and simply because they're cheap, they are the right thing for the job, and if you mix it up with a slow cure epoxy, you get an incredibly strong bond. The wood and the wood is going to break before that bond will. Okay, it is designed for a structural bond, and it's very cheap. You know, you can buy a big bucket for about £10. Okay, and then you can go to your local glass fibre supplier and buy them from there. They will also supply you with an epoxy resin with a slow cure catalyst. Okay, now the slower you can cure epoxy, the stronger the bond. So anything structural, I always use a slow cure epoxy. Now, on the other hand, there is a product called High Sol. It's made by Loctite. Okay, you could use that. In effect, it is basically the same thing. The only difference is High Sol's very expensive, and a litre of epoxy and catalyst and a bucket of microfibers is incredibly cheap. You can mix it up yourself to whatever consistency you want. You can put it into a syringe if you want and inject it in. You can do, you can do whatever you want. Okay, it gives you more flexibility than the High Sol does. Okay, but it's purely and simply personal choice. Now, you do need to let a slow cure resin cure, and I always leave it a minimum of 24 hours before I start mucking around with it. 24 hours is long enough, so I do it in the morning or in the evening and then come back the next day around about the same time, and you can start doing it. So once we've glued the woodwork back into the mechanics, it was time to fit the mechanics back into the fuselage, and the model was ready for a test flight. And this is the test flight. I hope you enjoy. Ready?
Yep.
Okay. It would be the first time flight with the sound you did. Okay, clear right, clear left.
Rotor idle.
Run through its sequence.
do I.
Up.
A little bit of a mechanical way. That could be good too. We'll leave the piping in there. Cracking itself. It's cracking itself.
There's a little flutter, but it's very marginal though. It's very minimal. You're not getting a lot of vibration from it though. Okay. The tracking doesn't look very obvious. There might be a slight split, but
5% more.
okay.
60%. Tracking looks better as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got a little bit of vibration on there. Happy?
Yeah, very happy. That was a nice test flight.
Excellent.
I think that vibration that we were seeing in the fuselage may be the tail boom, where it's not very well supported.
Could be.
Hope you enjoyed that test flight. It went very well. We did have to make a couple of modifications to the model. One of them was some bracing, which was required because the mechanics was wobbling like that inside. Not a lot, just wobbling inside the fuselage. So what we did then was make some aluminium tube braces, crushed the ends, cut them to size, crushed the ends, glued an extra piece of wood using microfiber mix again to the underside of the where the canopy fits on, and that cured the problem. Okay, it's nice and stiff in the fuselage. So what I was worried about there was the control rods rubbing on the hole. Okay, but apart from that, the test flights went very well. Very pleased. Very much hope you enjoyed this video, and look forward to seeing you in part 2, where we talk about the fuselage itself. Thank you for watching.